Hello, and welcome to the Module 2 commentary video, Records Inventories for LIS 886. Please take a moment to adjust your video and sound settings for optimal viewing quality of this video. If you encounter any difficulties in viewing this video, please feel free to contact me as soon as possible. Well folks, we're in week 2. Prior to viewing the video for this module, please read chapter 2 in the Safety text, pages 31 to 57. Also, please read the handout on Canvas called 5 Steps for Merging RIM Programs by Jordan McKee. Directions on where to locate the handout will be available in your Module 2 to-do list posted on Canvas and emailed to you by me. In Module 1, we discussed RIM as a profession and its significance in the big picture of an organization. With those ideas in mind, our focus now shifts to the nitty-gritty of a RIM program, mostly taking an inventory of the current state of the union. Without being too flippant, it's next to impossible to successfully manage a RIM program without knowing what sorts of records and information you possess as an organization. Now, as a sidebar, when I say organization, this could be corporation, library, basically any entity that you work at, okay? As you probably noticed, RIM doesn't just directly apply to corporate organizations. It really can be any entity here that we're talking about. While it may seem easy to just quickly make a list and start organizing, the text and professional best practices dictate a systematic approach to this entire process of inventory. In this module, we will take a deep dive into the involved process of a records inventory. I'll spend a fair amount of time giving you hints and tricks on how to navigate the process and the involved politics. Finally, I'll give you some insights into things you might wish to avoid during the records inventory process. Lots of fun, let me tell you. Alright, let's begin with Records Inventory 101. As we begin our deep dive into the topic of records inventories, it'd be helpful to explain the concepts and key elements which surround the process. A records inventory serves as the foundation of any good RIM program for several key reasons. Before you could possibly decide which records must be kept, are considered vital, or can be imaged for that matter, you must have a solid sense of the scope of your current state of affairs. With that said, your role as a RIM professional will be to meet with key stakeholders who produce and maintain records and get a sense, to put it bluntly, of what they have. Ideally, a records inventory will be all-encompassing or cover every unit in an organization. However, as you will learn, several key factors drive the extent to which a records inventory is performed and can impact the scope of your work. At the very least, you will need to know, what you need to know is that an organizational records inventory is in fact a fact-finding mission, really which to find out what records you have at the organization. In the big picture, the records inventory process is a vital cog in the wheel of RIM program management. In the professional arena, the records inventory will likely occur after an edict is given to create and manage a RIM program, or if you're coming into an existing program after you get your feet under you and understand the way the organization works. The inventory is truly the first step in getting the program off the ground and directly feeds the next process, which that is the creation of a records retention schedule. In Module 3, we will explore the concept of a records retention schedule. However, for the time being, just know it's important to accurately identify the existing landscape of records, so making decisions on how long to keep something and what to do with it, otherwise known as a records retention schedule, will be less painful. While not rocket science or brain surgery, a records inventory must be done with a high degree of accuracy so as to make the RIM program a success. When performing a records inventory, the text suggests 4 key elements you must include to ensure success. Having conducted several inventories myself, I would wholeheartedly agree with the 4 items listed on your screen, and they are vital to this exercise. First, you must consider and formulate a plan for the process. How in-depth will you go? How many departments? That sort of thing. Next, you will need to prepare an inventory instrument. Will you use questionnaires? Information note-taking? Will you make recordings? That sort of stuff. Then, you must actually perform the inventory. How will you account for what you find? What political and behavioral considerations will you encounter? Those sorts of things. Finally, you need to finalize the findings of the process. Will you need additional follow-ups? Do you think additional hardware and or software will be necessary to manage the found records? And those sort of things. All of these items and more will be explored in our next couple slides. As a key element of preparing your inventory plan, you must consider the scope of the project. While it may seem logical to inventory the entire organization to uncover all the records, there are two main schools of thought when it comes to scope. First, let's examine inventorying the entire organization's records as a project scope. The authors and I both recommend only attempting to go this route if your organization is small to medium in size. As you will find in speaking to RIM professionals in your first project, attempting an inventory of all records at an organization such as Pepsi, Hyatt, or PricewaterhouseCoopers could be monstrous, if not impossible in an undertaking. Also, be mindful of the size and capacity of your records management staff. Even with a staff of 3, for example, it could take over a year to inventory a medium-sized organization. If you have to balance other records tasks such as marketing, training, and records coordinator management, you might be very stressed out as a professional in trying to attempt a full organization inventory and be on LinkedIn trying to find a new job right away. Also, if inventories take over a year, some of the information you collected early on in the process may have expired, or in other words, may not be valid due to changes in operation, politics, law, or other policies. Instead, you'll probably want to focus in on inventorying key program units in a medium to large organization. In reality, your managers will want to see progress, and it might behoove you politically to inventory departments which are pain points or the most logical in nature. In education, for example, I would say start with admissions. In manufacturing, maybe start with the accounts receivable or accounts payable, or maybe the financial side of the house. Each one of you can think in your organization or of an organization that you know where you'd probably want to start. In other words, be politically savvy and try to get the most bang for your buck. As with any inventory, be sure to examine records and data on all mediums: electronic, paper, microfilm, databases, and so on. Don't take a shortcut and forget about a platform, because that's just going to probably get you in the end and create more work for you. And you really don't want to do that. Within an organization, you will find several entities called program units. Program units can go by several names: departments, business units, divisions, and so on. The size and complexity of the organization will drive how small or large these entities can be on the organizational chart. Even with an organization such as a library, you will have some sort of reporting structure. Obviously, when we start talking about corporations, they tend to have very clearly delineated reporting structures. So bottom line, no matter what organization you're looking at or want to look at in the future, make sure you have a sense as to how it's organized. As a new RIM professional, the first thing I did and would recommend you doing is to get a copy of the organizational chart and spend some time analyzing reporting structures and how the place operates. Then translate the organizational structure into your inventory plan. Does it make sense to inventory a high-level division like finance first, including areas under it such as AP or AR? Or should you focus in on a key area of records such as the compensation and benefits area of human resources and then work from there? Again, the decision on where to start and at what scope is multifaceted and should be thoroughly discussed with your senior management and reflective in your organizational needs. If your target, for instance, or Advocate Healthcare, both organizations with recent data breaches, you may want to focus on the areas which are vulnerable and will show the best goodwill towards customers and patients. If you are a victim of a data breach, which we will talk about later on in the course, some of this has to deal with public relations, and it makes better sense to focus in on the areas which caused you to be in the public eye, rather to try to go into the background somewhere and maybe do something else. Even though it may seem logical from a theoretical standpoint to try to go through the organization with key business units, you may be told that you have to focus in on a certain area politically. So make sure you keep that in mind. As much as we try to get away from politics or may roll our eyes at politics, it really ultimately is going to be driving some of the work you're doing. It's just inevitable and you can't get away from it. So best to talk about it now and understand it the way it is. Speaking of organizational charts, it's very important, if not absolutely necessary, to have approval to perform the RIM-related tasks from the highest person on the organizational chart. Ideally, the organization's president, CEO, board of directors, or a very high-level vice president should formally communicate the importance of the RIM program to employees. Without this type of blessing, it's likely your RIM program will not possess the clout necessary to create the necessary environment in which to perform tasks like inventories. Employees will need to know your role as a RIM manager is grounded in a greater organizational need rather than just some punk poking around on computers and files in your office. Ideally, this edict on high, so to speak, should come and state the importance of a RIM program. It is likely the chief executive will have you craft talking points for the memo or speech to colleagues, so be sure to cite the legal, compliance, business, and other cost reasons in having a RIM program. Chapter 1 of our text does a great job in outlining these issues, so make sure you take your book with you because you'll never know when you're going to have to use it in the future. Also, the chief executive should tell colleagues that members of the RIM program or outside consultants will be in program units asking questions and looking around. Finally, the message should call upon program units to designate at least one records coordinator to assist in the process. Recall from your readings, a records coordinator is a knowledgeable staff member from a program unit who will serve as the liaison between the RIM department and program units. This person or persons should have a good knowledge of RIM within their program unit. All of these elements combined should set the foundation for good, far-reaching work within program units during the inventory process. As an example, here is a snippet of the official policy in place at my organization, which is DePaul University. After the president sent an organizational-wide memo informing program units of the RIM program's existence, a policy related to RIM quickly followed. This policy, which is public-facing on our website, if you're curious, it's rm, as records management, .depaul.edu, clearly spells out the requirements for the RIM program management and all the pertinent details involved in it. Having an official policy, especially if it's public-facing, can be very helpful in showing organizational commitment to RIM program management. After the blessing has been given, it's time to dig into the RIM records inventory process. While you can go about the process in many ways, Safety recommends 3 different approaches to taking an inventory: the questionnaire method, the consultation method, and the hybrid method. Each method has its own benefits and drawbacks, so let's go ahead and pause for a moment to explore each of them in depth. One popular approach to the records inventory process is the questionnaire method. In a nutshell, RIM program staff develop a document asking several questions about records contained in a program unit. Records coordinators or other program unit staff members are asked to fill out and return the questionnaires to RIM program staff members. From there, the RIM program staff members analyze the results and begin the process of developing a records retention schedule. While much shorter in duration, the questionnaire method can also lead to several problems in the big picture. With little or no time spent on actually visiting the program unit, records may be overlooked, minimized in nature, or totally ignored in the process. Also, records coordinators, while very well intended in nature, are not trained RIM professionals. So if you intend to deploy the questionnaire method out of sake of time or necessity, be sure to include a proper orientation on the instrument to any individuals filling out the forms. In other words, leave nothing to the imagination, as the records inventory process is so crucial to RIM program success. Another option, in my opinion and the text opinion, as the best approach, is the consultation method. Essentially, RIM program staff members or outside consultants meet with the program staff unit and physically inventory the records in all formats. By actually performing the inventory on site, RIM staff members and/or consultants can physically or electronically touch the records and observe their natural habitats. Sounds very Animal Kingdom in nature, but that's just really the nature of the beast, no pun intended. On-site consultants can also ask many follow-up questions with program unit employees and sometimes flush out overlooked or forgotten records. The key drawback to the consultation method is the time commitment required to deploy this methodology. This method can also incur a large cost if outside consultants are used to augment the existing RIM program staff or perform the work altogether. Finally, a hybrid approach, or blending the questionnaire and consultation methods, can be used. In practice, I rely heavily on the hybrid method to perform records inventories at DePaul. While I don't have the time to physically view each file, I send out a questionnaire prior to my meeting and schedule an hour or so follow-up for questions and answers with the program unit staff. In this approach, my time spent on site is much more directed and informed and typically more useful. I still look at files and browse through items, but I have a sense in terms of what's there already, so I can kind of just focus in on some of the items I think are missing. All three of these approaches described are equally useful, but as always, you must tailor the approach to fit your organization's unique needs and politics. While I am in no way endorsing any particular product or company, I will expose you to several key players in the RIM sales industry throughout the course. I made mention in a previous slide to organizations which may choose to deploy the consultation method during the inventory process, but may choose to hire outside folks to do the actual work. In some organizations, firms such as Iron Mountain will be hired to perform the initial records inventory and then quote-unquote hand off the results to the RIM program staff. If a budget exists for these services, outside consultants can allow internal RIM staff the time to focus on other programs related to RIM program management and not spend all of their time out in the field looking through boxes. Most strategic leaders see consultants as nice to have, but the first to cut in budget shortfalls. Regardless, it's good to know that outside services do exist to help in the inventory process if internal staffing is not sufficient to perform the task. As you begin work in a program unit, the very first question you will be asked by a records coordinator is how long this inventory process is going to take to complete. It's highly likely the records coordinator will be meeting with you in addition to other duties, so be prepared for the angst that seems to come along with the perception of extra work. While it's somewhat difficult to give an estimate, you can typically plan on about 15 to 20 minutes per record series. I will get into the clinical definition of record series here in a bit, but for the meantime, just keep in mind this time frame so you at least know it as a reference. For the sake of your own sanity, limit the inventory sessions to about 2 hours. The text will make it sound like one can do a records inventory like a machine and go on for hours, but I'm here to tell you about a 2-hour shelf life is about all you can expect before you start to go cross-eyed. If you have to be on site or in a unit for a whole day, try to take frequent breaks just to keep from going crazy. If you're somewhat local to the program unit, like in the same building for instance, consider multiple sessions with the department. In practice, I found it's easier to have a records coordinator commit to small inventory bursts rather than one marathon session. However, play the politics correctly and gauge your audience. Finally, an overarching theme to RIM, be sure to inventory all records in all mediums. Overturn every stone, open every cabinet, and click on every share folder. You will never know what is going to turn up in the next folder or in the next share drive. After the records inventory process, the focus will turn to assigning records retention periods to the discovered record series in a program unit. With that said, it's time to give a formal definition to the term record series. In a nutshell, Safady states a record series is a group of logically related items in a business unit, or found across multiple business units. For example, patient medical records are likely found in the individual offices of a group medical practice, if not found on paper. However, employee personnel records may be found partially in an office, but then partially in the human resources office. Regardless of where it's at, the role of the RIM program manager is to ultimately assign a retention period to the found record series. As you proceed through the records inventory process, carefully detail everything that is found in a particular record series and where it's located in the organization. Trust me, it'll make your life so much easier when it comes to creating the actual records retention schedule. As an example, I wanted to show you a list of the files I discovered in a particular office here in my organization. As you can see, the document type column in the blue list shows all of the found sample items in an examined file. While we'll get to the green columns next in our next module next week, just know each file type was eventually tied to a record series number, assigned a records retention period, a records retention event, and ultimately an action. In the big picture, the records inventory starts the process which ultimately ends in the records retention schedule. From an operational perspective, the document above is of great help to records coordinators and program unit staff, as it clearly delineates the retention expectations as they relate to a unit. Alright, enough planning and definitions. Now it's time for you to actually roll up your sleeves, get dirty, and start the inventory. From previous experience, I would highly recommend asking the program unit records coordinator to send you a list of possible record series ahead of time. I usually tell the records coordinator to grab 10 or so files and make a running list of all the types of documents which show up. By doing this, you'll get a good idea of the landscape prior to your first meeting. Once you get in the program unit, be sure every type of document gets a name and a 1 or 2 sentence description of the item. It may be helpful to ask for a copy of some templates that are found, or maybe ask for redacted versions of unique documents. I often do this because I sometimes forget what a record series looks like by the time I get back to my office. Be sure you pay special attention to the dates found on the records, and how they're managed, and how many of them there are. Do you notice that they're organized by a unique identifier such as a patient ID? Are some records on paper until a certain date and then arranged in PDF files on a network drive after a certain date? Do you find that there are multiple file rooms that exist, one of which may be an attic? Okay, then you need to discuss with the records coordinator how much growth is anticipated in the file volume. Are there tons of records from the mid-2000s, but then a procedural switch in 2009 caused a reduction in forms? Knowing the rate at which the files will grow will help you coach the department in later meetings on how to best manage the records. Finally, pay close attention to confidentiality. Do you notice that forms have social security numbers, credit card numbers, or other personally identifiable information, also known as PII? If this is the case, you will want to be in touch with your legal department and/or information technology area to understand the storage needs and vulnerabilities at your organization. Also, keep in mind, some files, like employee medical records, must be kept separate from other personnel files by law. If you're confused or overwhelmed by the rules as they relate to your field, it's sometimes best to contact peers at other firms, if they'll cooperate, and always communicate with your legal counsel. Remember, you will be looked upon as a subject matter expert, otherwise known as an SME or a SME, as an expert when it comes to legal RIM rules. They're going to think you know everything. So never be afraid to ask questions or seek outside guidance if you're unsure. The last thing you want to do is tell someone that it's okay to store a document with a social security number in an area that could be hacked into by an outside person because you don't have the technology available to keep the file safe. Okay? So make sure that you're upfront with your legal counsel or your chief executives about what it is that you find. There are many things I also wouldn't recommend doing during the inventory process. To be frank, over half the program units you will meet with will immediately be suspicious of why you're snooping around. Even if the edict from on high is gentle and well-intended, some records coordinators will feel like you're snooping around in their unmentionable drawer at home. With that said, I would refrain from calling the inventory an audit, a review, or some other intimidating term. You're not the IRS or the records police, so try to come in as the good cop, always ready and willing to help. Some people will just be nervous in nature, so it may help you just to sit down with them and say, you will not talk about what you see outside of the actual inventory, and they can trust you. Okay, so make sure you build that trust with them. It's half psychological in nature. Also, beware of running any side commentary on the current state of their records. Yes, you will find people sitting on records from the 60s. Yes, you will wonder how some folks even function in their day-to-day work lives. However, even though this is very hard for me, I have to know to dial down the humor and sarcasm for a few hours and accept the situation as it's presented to me. I also often find RIM program professionals throwing around the word hoarding as if it's humorous and lighthearted. While the media has portrayed hoarding as something to be fascinated about, for some it's actually a debilitating mental illness. While an office may resemble something you see on A&E, try to refrain from using that word as you never quite know your audience and their struggles. It may seem like something which seems overly politically correct, but the last thing you want to do is insult somebody or lose their trust in you. It's just my 2 cents on the matter. Also, don't let records coordinators run the show. If you're wanting to spend more time looking at files or feel as if key elements of the inventory may have been overlooked, simply request more time with the program unit and/or ask for additional follow-up. Yes, the records coordinators are very busy and probably lacking in time, but you also have a job to do and you don't want to miss something big. Also, the same thing goes for you. Don't schedule an in-depth interview on a Friday or a night before a major holiday or vacation. If the Blackhawks just won the Stanley Cup, then next morning is probably not the time to do an in-depth records inventory. Be realistic about the inventory and its importance and make sure you schedule your time accordingly. And finally, I've said this before, but I'll say it again. Though you will have more knowledge than most folks about RIM, you're not an expert on everything. If you've never heard of a particular record series before, don't politely nod your head and play along. Be bold, ask questions. If you're completely confused, make a note of your gap in knowledge and start researching as soon as you return to the office. I cannot tell you how many times I have Googled something that I did not understand that I found in an office. Again, it's better safe to be sorry. Better safe than to be sorry. That's the way to say it. Alright, my friends, this concludes the Module 2 commentary on records inventories. If you have any questions or would like more information on the elements I discussed in the commentary, please do not hesitate to contact me directly. I will talk to you again in Module 3.